សូមស្វាគមន៍ឯកឧត្តមលោកលោកស្រីដែលមានវត្តមាននៅទីនេះកម្មវិធីយើងខ្ញុំនឹងធ្វើការចាប់ដំណើរការនៅក្នុងរយៈពេល5នាទីទៀតមុននឹងឈានដល់ការដំណើរការនៃកម្មវិធីនាងខ្ញុំសូមធ្វើការពន្យល់នៅវិធានមួយចំនួនសម្រាប់អ្នកចូលរួមសម្រាប់ការបកប្រែភ្ញៀវកិត្តិយសទាំងអស់អាចធ្វើការចុចទៅលើរូបផែនដីដែលមានសរសេរបញ្ជាក់ថា interpretation ដើម្បីជ្រើសរើសភាសានៃជម្រើសរបស់អ្នកដែលក្នុងនោះរួមមានភាសាខ្មែរនិងភាសាអង់គ្លេសសូមចុចពាក្យថា off សម្រាប់ស្ដាប់ការនិយាយផ្ទាល់ Microphone និងវីដេអូរបស់អ្នកនឹងត្រូវបានបិទសម្រាប់សំណួរសូមប្រើប្រាស់ប៊ូតុង Q&A សូមចុចសញ្ញាតំណាងឲ្យការលើកដៃដើម្បីឲ្យអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលនៃកម្មវិធីអញ្ជើញអ្នកធ្វើការនិយាយ Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our lunch will begin in 5 minutes. Before we begin our lunch, I would like to have some house rules to follow. For language interpretation, there is an interpretation option for webinar control, which allow you to choose between English and Khmer. For original audio, you can just simply click off. Your microphone and video are off by default. Please use Q&A function for question. You may click raise hand icon and our moderator will acknowledge you to speak. Thank you. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Soda Vignon. It is my pleasure to be your moderator for this morning. On behalf of ADB and CDRI, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We appreciate you taking off your time from your busy schedule to join us today. I would like to welcome all of you to join the launch of ADB-CDRI Depository Library, an ADB book on Asian Journey to Prosperity. For today's agenda, we will be having a series of sessions. First, we will be having an opening remark delivered by His Excellency Van de Ham. Second, we will be having a keynote on ADB book Asian Journey to Prosperity delivered by Mr. Sawada Yasuyuki. After that, there will be a panel discussion with our expert from Ministry of Ministry of Economic and Finance, ADB and CDRI. This will be followed up by a presentation on ADB-CDRI Depository Library. We will also take questions from our audience after the presentation. Last but not least, we will be having our closing remark delivered by Ms. Suniya Durrani Jamal. To begin this launch, we are pleased to invite His Excellency Van de Ham, the Secretary of State from Ministry of Economic and Finance, to deliver the opening remark. A little bit about His Excellency's background. His Excellency Van de carries spam across private sector, the United States nation system, multilateral development bank, and government. As Secretary of State, he looks after development, financing, coordination, and management of ODA, public debt management, and support key policy agenda. He coordinating a number of interministerial mechanisms that tackle infrastructure and urbanization challenge in Cambodia. He is also a member of the Supreme Nation Economic Council and also incumbent chair of the country coordinating committee for the Global Fund program to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria in Cambodia. His Excellency Van de obtained his mid-career Master of Public Administration from Howard Kennedy School of Government in the year of 2014, and Master of Art International School, and Master of Art in International Development from International University of Japan in 2002. He received his bachelor degree of Business Administration from National Institute of Management in Cambodia by the year of 1999. Please join me to welcome His Excellency Ham Van de to deliver his opening remark.
Thank you, Miss. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. It is indeed a pleasure for me, on behalf of the Ministry of Economies and Finance, to welcome and address you all at this important launch event. We thank you for your time and dedication to join us during this unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that we could make this virtual launching possible, despite all constraints, speak volumes to our shared values and commitment to cultivating, sharing, and enriching ourselves with knowledge and information resources. I sincerely applaud ADB for its strong commitment to being a knowledge bank. As our long-standing development partners, we have not only benefited from ADB support to our development agendas, but also inherited a rich collection of knowledge product, and most importantly, our conviction that we shall become a knowledge-based economy, and that expertise and knowledge transfer shall always be at the core of ADB support to our country. I am delighted to acknowledge today that we are not just launching a book, but a collection of powerful and useful policy findings and recommendations that have shaped the rise of Asia and Pacific region over the past 50 years. Its contents must be priceless, and it would be rare, if not exceptional, to indulge oneself with the experience and lesson learned from the transformational journeys of 46 economies in one compendium we proudly launched today. Over the course of this half century, we have witnessed different levels of success and accomplishment across country. Yet one reality remains constant to me, which is that Asia is a promising region and drivers of the world well-being. COVID-19 pandemic have decimated our aspiration for speedy achievement of sustainable development goal for many countries in our region, but it can never reduce our determination to bring prosperity and better quality of life to our people. Asia has proven itself as a region full of potentials. During the last 2 decades before the COVID-19 pandemic, through continued deepening in socio-economic integration, including trade, investment, business, education, and social development, Asia has experienced high growth and rapid development, as well as socio-economic progress, poverty reduction, and greater incomes of the people. Notably, at present, China is the second largest economy, Japan the third, while ASEAN, and India are the fifth and sixth respectively in the world. In the next session, I believe that Mr. Yasuyuki will provide us the perspective, not just from the lenses of history and Asia track records, but hopefully how the future lies for Asia, given the change in context and the growing numbers of challenges facing all of us, from catastrophic threats of climate change to industrial revolution to digital transformation of our society, to name a few. It also gives me pride to join you all in inaugurating ADB Depository Library with CDRI, which is one of our reputable research and policy think tanks. As our government continues to expand our investment in education and skill development, we are truly encouraged to see such partnership and collaboration to create another bank of knowledge that shall serve our current and future generation well beyond the needs of the day. I urge all of you to spread the word, help advocate its use, and contribute in any way you can to enrich its resources. As I have consistently made my call, I hope ADB will continue to prioritize its knowledge works and technical capacity building and provide necessary funding to ensure that the country foundation remains solid, and we will sooner rather than later become the knowledge-based economy. To all our stakeholders here, I also call upon you to join hands to contribute and nurture our society and community into one that thrive and serve for knowledge, which I am totally convinced that is the only sustainable way to develop our homeland. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, His Excellency Hambandi, for the wonderful remark. And now it is with pleasure that I introduce to you Mr. Sawada Yasuyuki, Chief Economist and Director General Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of Asian Development Bank. A little bit about Mr. Sawada background. Mr. Sawada is the Chief Spokesperson for ADB on economic and development trend and led the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, which published ADB Flagship knowledge product. Mr. Sawada is a Japanese national. He holds a doctorate degree in economics and master degree in international development policy from Stanford University, a master degree in international relations from University of Tokyo, a master degree in economics from Osaka University, and a bachelor degree in economics from Quad University, Japan. Mr. Sawada is a professor in the Faculty of Economics at the University of Tokyo, Japan. Please join us to welcome Mr. Sawada Yasuyuki to deliver his keynote on ADB book, Asia's Journey to Prosperity.
Thank you very much. Excellency Hem Vandi, Secretary of State for the Ministry of Economy and Finance, Mr. Ross Basana, Director of the Center for Development Economics and Trade at CDRI, Mr. Bernard Lee Woods, Principal Director of the Department of Communication, DOC ADB, Ms. Sunia Durrani Jamal, Country Director, ADB Cambodia Resident Mission, colleagues from CDRI and ADB, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. I'd like to welcome also to launch of the ADB-CDRI Depository Library and ADB publication, Asia's Journey to Prosperity. I'd like to thank CDRI to co-host today's event. Also, I'd like to thank Ms. Davi Nong and Ms. Sarang Kang for moderating today's event. So in the next 25 minutes or so, I'd like to share with you this new publication by ADB, Asia's Journey to Prosperity, Policy, Market, and Technology over 50 years. I hope slide will be uploaded. Yes, so this is the cover page. And this book came out of a 3-year-long study by ADB, led by Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, and involving ADB staff from various departments and offices. And actually, former President Nakao, Takehiko Nakao, played a key role in completing this book. And de facto, he played a role as a chief editor of this book. And he really involved line by line editing of this book. And this book is has 530 pages, very lengthy, but I hope I can share with you main key messages out of this book. Looking back in 1960s, Asia was very poor. Feeding a large and growing population was one of the critical challenges. There was a pessimism about Asia's prospect 5-6 decades ago. As you may know, famous Gunnar Myrdal's Nobel laureate Gunnar Myrdal's book titled Asian Drama really postulated the pessimism about industrialization and broader development of Asia. Half a century on, Asia has emerged indeed as a center of global dynamism. What can explain Asia's economic success in the past 50 years? So this book attempts to answer this fundamental question. Admittedly, there are many studies on Asian development. One well-known study was by World Bank titled The East Asian Miracle, published in 1993, a quarter century ago. This ADB book differs from the World Bank Miracle reports in 3 respects. One is the ADB book covers a much wide range of countries and economies. Secondly, this book covers a much longer time period. 5 decades or even more in some chapters. And then thirdly, we cover a wide range of topics, including gender, empowerment, and climate change, as well as infrastructure investment. So please move on to the next slide. So here's my presentation outline. There are 2 sections. First, I'd like to give you a broad overview of this book. And then secondly, I'd like to summarize and also provide some further readings for this topic. So let's move on to slide number 5. Yes, slide number 5. Yes, so this is this is a table of contents. We try to cover elements of this phenomenal growth of Asia and Pacific in 15 chapters listed here, ranging from structural transformation, technology, education, gender, to macro stability and regional cooperation and integration. And as I said, more than 500 pages in 15 chapters. So I will try to summarize these 15 chapters selectively within 20 or so minutes. So please move on to slide number 7. Slide number 7, yes, this slide shows the overall key development achievements of Asia. Between 1960 and 2018, basically 5 decades, developing Asia, including ADB's 46 developing member countries and economies, average annual per capita GDP growth reached 4.7%. This is the fastest growth rate among the different regions in the world. A rapid economic growth led to a rising share in global GDP of Asia. In 1960, developing Asia's share in global GDP was only 4%. By year 2018, the share has increased to 24%. Including Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, Asia's share in global GDP rose from 13% to 34%. So this is a remarkable achievement we can see. And the next slide shows consequences of rapid growth. Rapid growth led to a dramatic improvements in Asia's broad development indicators. Rate of extreme poverty declined from 68% in year 1980 down to 7% in year 2015, with more than 1 billion people escaping extreme poverty. Life expectancy at birth rose, infant mortality rate dropped substantially, and mean years of schooling increased significantly. So these are the consequences of rapid growth in broader social outcomes. So let's move on to our next slide. Then a natural question is what explains Asia's economic success? And the next slide, slide number 10. So what explains Asia's economic success? There are a few elements as listed here. Successful economies relied on markets and private sector as engines of economic growth, while the state played a proactive role in addressing market failure and supporting the private sector. Critically, Asian countries adopted better policies and created stronger institutions for market-based growth. So this is a core element discussed in this book. We listed in the book 9 drivers of growth alongside with this nexus of market and government, complementarity. While we are under time constraint today, I'd like to quickly go over these 9 drivers. So next slide. Let me start by very first driver. As we can see from this slide, in the past 50 years or so, in most developing Asian economies, development policy shifted from state-led industrialization to market-oriented growth. Roughly, the period after World War II can be divided into 5 phases shown here. In summary, half a century Asian development again shows the substantial growth and poverty reduction require efficient markets and effective state and strong institutions. So initially putting big weights on rural states, and then gradually, or due to some trigger, all the Asian economies shifted from entirely or heavily state dependence development model into more hybrid optimal mixture of government and market development modality. That has been very important, the very first driver of continued growth of Asia Pacific. So next slide showing that second driver. Second driver is to promote structural transformation from the agriculture to manufacturing and then high-end service sector. Structural transformation has been a key driver of growth and development across the world, whether in developed or developing countries. But Asia achieved this stylized structural transformation at a very fast pace and much faster pace than other economies, and also much faster pace than developed countries' history. So let me move on to the next slide. Actually, structural transformation is critical because this involves shift of resources, capital and labor, from low productivity production to high productivity production in each of the three sectors I mentioned, agriculture, manufacturing, and services, through a technological progress. Indeed, gross decomposition using gross accounting framework shows the in 1970s and 1980s, Asian growth was driven mainly by mobilizing resources, physical capital shown in green in this chart, right chart, and also contribution labor in orange, as well as a human capital shown in yellow part. Over time, TFP, total factor productivity, this is a canonical measure of technological progress. TFP is shown in the blue. So over time, TFP, technological progress, became more important as source of growth, reflecting a rising importance of technological progress and efficiency improvements. In the last 7-8 years, TFP growth accounted for 40% of total GDP growth of developing Asia, the same as a contribution by physical capital stock. This overall efficiency gain as a critical source of development of Asia became possible through the rapid structural transformation from low productivity sector to higher productivity sector. So this structural transformation is the second key driver of Asian development. So please move on to the next slide. The third policy driver of Asian development is investing in productive capacity. Actually, capital accumulation also play a key role, as we have seen in the previous slide. During year 1960 to 2017, developing Asia's physical capital stock grew at 7% per annum. That means every 10 years double the size of physical capital, from $4 trillion to 176 trillion US dollars from 1960 to 2017. Growth was highest for People's Republic of China, but also high in other sub-regions. High growth Asian economies made large investment in physical capital, financed largely by domestic savings, as we can see from the right chart. And the next slide, continuing investing in productive capacity as a key driver, third key driver. This physical capital investment, substantial portion was used for infrastructure, transport, power, water, sanitation, and telecommunications. As you can see from the left chart, during 1917 to 2018, again over roughly 50 years, per capita electricity generation increased by 35 times in Korea, 30 times in China, 19 times in Thailand, 14 times increase in electricity generation in Malaysia, 9 times in India. So this significantly narrowed the gap with advanced countries. So these are the third driver, investing in productive capacity, physical capital, and especially in physical infrastructure. So let me move on to the next slide. The fourth policy driver is human capital accumulation, which also complements the physical capital accumulation and infrastructure accumulation. And the human capital accumulation generated the so-called demographic dividends for high growth. Many Asian economies made efforts to build human capacity by making education a basic right through compulsory education, investment in schools, and education reforms. In the 1970s up until 2010s, public expenditure on education increased from 2% of GDP to 3.6% GDP, as we can see from the left chart. As a result of these policy measures, most Asian economies achieved the universal or near universal access to primary education. Many achieved universal or near universal access to secondary education, and there were also significant expansion in tertiary education, as we can see from the right chart. So this is the fourth key driver. So let me move on to the fifth one, next slide. As the fifth driver of growth, Asian economies achieved accelerated technological progress, as we have already seen in the TFP decomposition in previous slide. At the very early stage, Asia adopted foreign technologies. Then the later stage innovated on their own using a variety of ways. So first phase, adoption phase, Asian countries and governments and economies adopted inviting experts from and sending students abroad, and also buying foreign technological licenses, conducting reverse engineering. So notably Toyota automobile initially engaged reverse engineering, and Samsung also engaged very extensive reverse engineering, and also importing machinery and promoting trade and foreign direct investment, FDI. Then gradually or continuously transform itself towards the innovation phase, which involved investing in research and development. Asia's progress in technological innovation has been quite dramatic. It has transformed from a user of foreign patents to producer of patents too, and Japan is a notable example. In order to capture this transformation, right chart looks at the top 5 economies globally in terms of the annual number of granted patents in the US in 1960s down and year 2015 up. The right chart latter half, we can see in 1960s, the top 5 countries who get the granted patents in the US included Germany, UK, France, Japan, and Canada. Only Japan was listed among the top 5. But by year 2015, upper side of the right chart, showing that the top 5 now included Japan, Korea, Germany, Taipei, China, and China. And also India is also among the top 10. So this really, behind this transformation is a transformation of adoption of technology to more on own innovation phase. And next slide showing a sixth driver. High growth Asian economies all maintain open trade and investment regimes, making Asia a center of global manufacturing production and value chains. Left 2 chart shows the Asian economy initially promoted exports of labor-intensive manufacturing products, and over time move up to the export more sophisticated products such as cars, electronics, and machines. In the last 2-3 decades, they participated in global value chain. Right chart shows in order to attract the FDI, Asian countries' economies set up special economic zones, SEZs, and provided tax incentives, making developing Asia one of the most attractive FDI destinations, accounting for 35% of the global total in year 2017. So open trade and investment, we listed as a 6th key driver. And next slide. So all of these micro or meso level continuous growth, structural transformation, technological adoption, investment, and also openness and engagement in trade and FDI. Actually, these are supported by stable macroeconomic environment. So that's a seventh key driver. Indeed, compared with other developing regions, Asia did better in macroeconomic management, whether looking at the growth rate, left chart, inflation, right chart, or frequency of economic crisis. All the measure indicators of macroeconomic stability, Asia has been doing relatively well. Good macro management provided basis for sustained growth, and the reforms in response to Asian financial crisis laid the foundation for future resilience. So key driver, macroeconomic stability, and the macroeconomic chapter, we also noted that Asia went through a major financial crisis, Asian financial crisis, and by doing this, responding a massive financial crisis, Asian financial system and also macroeconomic environment became quite resilient. So, ASEAN +3 framework and Chiang Mai Initiative, multilateralization, and also for macro surveillance, AMRO has been set by ASEAN +3, etc., etc. So this respect, macroeconomic chapter also described how Asia became quite resilient in terms of macroeconomic management. And next slide, eighth driver is rapid economic growth and target policy led rapid poverty reduction. So that's also a key driver of continued economic success. However, right chart shows Asia had stable inequality up until 1980s. This is a pattern known as growth with equity in East Asia. However, since the 1990s, growth has been accompanied by rising inequality in some economies. So this is one of the challenges, but the overall social inclusiveness, poverty reduction has been the key supporting driver of successful Asian economy. So number 9, key driver, final but not least, a key driver is engagement with the development partners and also promoting regional cooperation and integration. Asia benefited a lot from engaging with bilateral partners and multilateral development banks in investing in development, especially in infrastructure, education, and health. Orange parts in this chart shows the official flows, which was largest in 1970s and 1980s. So we can see, bilateral and multilateral development resource flows play a very important role to support Asia's continued economic growth. In South Asia and Southeast Asia, development assistance financed 10 to 20% of GDP in the 1970s and 1980s. Such partnerships remain relevant for Asia's changing needs, providing response support by combining financing with policy advice. And the COVID-19 outbreak really highlighted the continued engagement is very, very critical for Asia to continue its economic development. And the next chart shows the regional cooperation integration has also played an important role combined with bilateral and multilateral resource flows. This is important in supporting Asian development by contributing to peace and security, inter-regional trade and investment, as well as providing regional public goods. Now, because of this pandemic and health crisis, role of regional cooperation integration to set the proper and also supply critical regional public goods, I think we all agree. This chart shows the in 2018, close to 60% of Asian trade were among Asian economies, and 50% of FDI inflows were from within Asia and Pacific region. So this also highlights importance of regional cooperation and integration. So next slide. So having seen 9 key drivers of Asian development, but there are some issues continue to subject to extensive debate. So next slide summarizes the 4 areas. There are heated debates still. Number 1 is Asian development unique or general development path? And indeed, this book argues successful Asian economies implemented market-oriented policy reforms that are not very different from standard economic theories. In this sense, this book highlighted Asian development is not necessarily unique. Secondly, role of industrial policy has been extensively debated. And also recently, there are renewed interest in role of industrial policy. This book argues yes and no, basically. If industrial policies used badly, targeted industry can lead to rent seeking, unfair competition, and inefficiency. But if industrial policies used wisely, such policy can effectively making strong positive spillovers and solving coordination problems, and basically moving market solution to optimal solution. So targeted policy is more likely to successful when it performance based, if it operates in a performance based manner, as Korean experience really teaches. And also if target industry policy promotes a competition with clear targets and the clear sunset clauses and transparent implementation rules, these tended to be quite successful. So as a country becomes more developed, industrial policy should focus more on supporting R&D to promote technology and innovation. And that are less distortionary. As we can see in technological driver slide, Asia is now many countries are moving up the ladder from adoption of technology phase to innovation of technology phase. In that respect, industrial policy in the area of R&D and innovation seems to play a key role. Number 3, can industrialization be bypassed? This is a critical question, especially in a country like the Philippines, where I'm sitting right now. Past experience of developed economies as well as Asian economies all tells us about the transformation from agriculture to manufacturing, especially labor-intensive industries, are critical first step. And then later on, moving the ladder towards the service sector. So the question is whether manufacturization phase can be bypassed. This book did not provide a definite answer, but note that manufacturing was important almost all high-income countries historically before their deindustrialization and moving towards a more service sector-driven economy. And manufacturing has a number of important features, tradability and foreign exchange generation by exports, high income elasticity of demand, and a large scope for innovation and technological progress. Scale economies in production characterize many manufacturing sectors, and creating better paying jobs for large size of population. So these are very, very specific feature of manufacturing. However, now service sector production became more tradable. So we cannot really provide a definite answer yet whether a country can bypass industrialization, manufacturization in structural transformation. So this is the number 3, the subject to extensive debate. And finally, but not least, importance of institutions. We all know institution or governance is indispensable component of development. New institutional economics, or a celebrated book by Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson titled Why Nations Fail. Asia usually has relatively low scores on governance ratings, according to the cross-country data. But its development performance is outstanding. And sometimes people consider Asia as a paradox in this respect. But this book argues, by and large, even within Asia, if we look carefully at the data, there is a positive association between governance and economic development. And Asia is not the exception of this pattern. So largely speaking, institution, even in Asia, has been playing an important role. So next slide. So now, having seen overall Asia's great performance, let me talk about the challenges of Asia. So next slide, please. Admittedly, not to mention the COVID-19 pandemic really generated big challenges. And here I listed Asia's challenges in the post-COVID era. Asia's development gaps with advanced countries remain still quite large as of year 2018. And we need to see how COVID-19 outbreak really affected this gap between advanced economies and Asia. Developing Asia's per capita GDP was just 13% of OECD level as of year 2018. Asian economies should maintain sound policies that provide to have worked and address remaining and emerging challenges. And here I listed the 7 big challenges. First one is we have seen still big challenge to tackle COVID-19, and especially at this stage, how to effectively roll out vaccines, for example. Overcoming a health crisis and reopening economy is a top priority. How to adapt smart lockdown containment, and also how to effectively roll out vaccines. And also medium term, it's really necessary to continue efforts to achieve universal health coverage, strengthening health system. A second challenge, innovate continuously. That's still needed. COVID-19 really accelerated digitalization and platform economies developed. Whether Asia can catch up or whether Asia can maximize benefit from digitalization, that's a big challenge. Number 3, while we highlighted increased nature of past Asian development, there is increased poverty due to COVID-19. According to our study last year, more than almost 100 million new poverty created due to a COVID-19 pandemic. Depending on the poverty line, which poverty line we adopt. But enormous increase in poverty due to COVID-19. And also gender gap in labor market, and also broader social and political arena, we see widening of gender gap and social inequality. So I think this is the very important challenge. Number 4, under school closure due to COVID-19, quality and learning challenges in education became fiercer than before. And Asian Development Outlook we released in April, we had a special analysis on economic cost of school closure after outbreak of COVID-19. That analysis really highlighted the seriousness of economic cost arising from school closure. And number 5, reducing large infrastructure gap is very, very critical. According to UN SCAP report, $1.5 trillion annually, that investment is needed in infrastructure investment as well as a social protection, and including some necessary investment in achieving a better biodiversity. $1.5 trillion are needed, and how to fill in this enormous investment needs to continue Asian growth. That's a really fundamental challenge. And number 5, building back smarter. This is very important. COVID-19 recovery should be building back greener and putting more efforts in greener recovery, and also more inclusive, tackling the widening pressure of social inequality. And number 7 is some countries in Asia, especially East Asia and also some Southeast Asian countries, very rapid aging is ongoing. So this put downward pressure on productivity growth in post-COVID recovery. So how to tackle this long-term trend is also a big challenge. So next slide, and the next one, I'd like to summarize what we have discussed today in my presentation. Asia's economic success owes much to creating better policy and strong institutions, which support the vitality of market mechanism. The book highlights the following points. Rely on market with proactive state support and optimal combination has been a very important key driver. Promoting structural transformation, investing in productive capacity, including infrastructure and human capital. These are very, very important driver. And also on external front, engagement in opening trade and FDI. And these economic activities and government intervention supported by very stable macro environment. And also keeping poverty continuously decline, and also maintaining inequality at moderate level has been also a basis for continued economic growth. And then partnership with external institutions, bilateral and multilateral organizations, including ADB, and also promoting regional cooperation integration, including ASEAN, ASEAN +3 framework. These are very important key driver. But having said this, as we have seen in the previous slide, going forward, Asia still faces many challenges, and there is no room for complacency. Asia must continue maintain good policy, strengthen institutions, and contribute to the development of science, technology, and tackling global issues. And now tackling COVID-19 pandemic and achieving building back smarter is a top priority. Not only for each country putting large effort, but also together needing support building back smarter, meaning building back greener and more inclusive. So with that, I'd like to finish my presentation. And next slide, I put some fundamental further readings. And also last slide, I put the link to the Asian Journey to Prosperity book. So this book is downloaded from this website. And now Vietnamese and Chinese translations are available, and Japanese translations are available soon. So with that, I'd like to stop my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm very happy to discuss further about key drivers behind Asia's remarkable development. And also, I'm happy to discuss about some specific issues around Cambodia's economic management. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sawada Yasuyuki, for the insightful keynote on the overall perspective of the book. For our next session, we will be having a panel discussion where we integrating questions from our audience to engage on the insightful perspective from Ministry of Economic and Finance, ADB and CDRI on the two important topics. First topic is focusing on what explains Asia's economic success. And second topic is about the key drive behind Cambodia's rapid growth and poverty reduction in the last 5 decades. Ms. Kiang Saran, a researcher from CDRI, will be our moderator for today's panel discussion. Ms. Saran, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ravi. Good morning, His Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Saran, a researcher at CDRI. I'll be the board moderator for the panel discussion this morning. Just to let you guys know, we will have 40 minutes for this panel discussion. I'll be asking some questions to the panelists, and then we will take questions from the audience. So the audience, you can type your question in the Q&A box or raise your hand, and then I'll press the allow to talk button to let you ask question. We ask that you identify yourself and your institution before you ask your question. So allow me to introduce the panelists. We have 3 panelists today. 2 of them you have already heard from. They are Mr. Savada Yasuyuki and His Excellency Wandi Ham. And then the 3rd panelist is Mr. Watanaruat. He is currently a research fellow and director of the Center for Development, Economics and Trade at CDRI. His main research interests include the nexus of economic growth, poverty and inequality, rural economic revitalization and financial inclusion, private sector development, and impact evaluation using microeconomic truth modeling. He has extensive experience, particularly in managing and analyzing complex and large-scale cross-sectional and panel survey data. He holds a Master of Economics from Kobe University, Japan. So welcome, Mr. Savada, His Excellency Wandi, and Mr. Watana. Thank you for agreeing to join us in the panel discussion today. To start off, I'd like to start with Mr. Savada. Based on your presentation just now, there are a number of factors that define Asia's economic success. But if you were to pick only 3 to expand on, what would they be? And how does Cambodia fit into that? Do those 3 factors also apply to Cambodia? Mr. Savada, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm tempted to pick more than 3, but if I confine attention to 3 priorities, overall, of course, relying on markets with proactive state support is the main driver. But I would pick number 1, promoting structural transformation is very important. And number 2, investing in productive capacity, especially human capital. That's a number 2 importance. And then thirdly, I would pick peace and prosperity as a basis of sustainable growth. So as I said, engagement with the development partners and promoting regional cooperation integration as one of the 9 drivers. So I would pick this as a 3rd key driver. So a little bit elaborated. The first, structural transformation and upgrading the industrial structure. I think in this book we explain canonical model of structural transformation in Asia, as known as flying wild geese model of Asian development. And I really think Cambodia has been taking this canonical Asian type of development model, flying wild geese development model for inclusive growth. First, structural transformation in this way, we see Cambodia continuously improving in agriculture production and also moving towards the labor-intensive manufacturing sector, especially garment, ready-made garment industry. And Cambodia are expected to become a major rice exporters in the future. And also Cambodia has been one of the successful cases to support outward-oriented development strategies, especially in government sector. And also foreign direct investment flowing into Cambodia at a very fast pace. And now FDI inflows accounting for around 10% of GDP, which is one of the highest level of in terms of FDI inflow. So, and then movement of labor towards a light and labor-intensive manufacturing services, giving more jobs and job opportunities for the rural poor, and decreasing overall poverty and inequality. So this virtuous cycle of structural transformation and investment, labor opportunity expansion, and FDI inflow and export-driven growth this canonical model of flying wild geese is happening in Cambodia. Having said this, I think human capital investment is indispensable element for supporting this Asian type of inclusive growth. Cambodia, we see really rapid human capital accumulation at a very fast speed. But as we included in this book, still Cambodia's years of schooling level and other human capital indicators still lagging behind over other Southeast Asian neighbors. And also gender gap seems to still exist. So I think further support of human capital investment is needed. And indeed, public spending in education as a ratio of GDP, it was less than 2% of GDP in Cambodia in 2010. So I think increased public spending and investment in education are quite necessary. And also some more focused and targeted supports are important. For example, scholarship to girls from poor families who are studying at the last grade of primary school, so that more girls can proceed to secondary school. These kind of customized and targeted program would be really critical. And indeed, this female scholarship program was supported by ADB through a Japan Fund for Poverty Reduction, JFPR, around 15 years ago. And there was a World Bank study showing that this really targeted female scholarship program increased the women's or female students' enrollments and attendance by 30 percentage point, generating a large impact of education, especially with the lowest socioeconomic status. So I think these customized targeted interventions are necessary. And also some infrastructure related to broader human capital accumulation, safe drinking water and sanitation. I think Cambodia, about 30% of population was still practicing open defecation, according to the figure in 2015. So I think improving these very basic infrastructure and also improving access to safe water, I think that's also a critical component of supporting human capital. Having this said, Cambodia had one of the most dramatic declines, achieving most dramatic declines in maternal mortality globally, if we look at globally. So, and Cambodia's success was due to a national campaign to increase health visit during the pregnancy and giving a special attention to childbirth care. So I think there are many initiatives the government really supported human capital investment and also expanded and continued support necessary for human capital. And then third element I listed, peace and prosperity as a basis of sustainable growth. As conflicts subsided and wars ended, so Cambodia joined ASEAN. And also ASEAN was transformed from primarily security arrangement to more on a regional grouping to foster economic cooperation and market-oriented policy reform. So engagement of Cambodia into ASEAN, and also another important program I'd like to mention is started in 1992. 6 countries in Mekong area joined the Greater Mekong Sub-region Economic Cooperation Program, in short, the GMS program. And this program has been focusing on increased connectivity through better physical infrastructure and improving competitiveness through facilitation of cross-border trade and movement of people, and then building back a great sense of cohesive community through shared concerns. So GMS program has been pays particular attention to building strategic alliances, especially with ASEAN. I think these international cooperation initiative has been and will play a very important role for Cambodia to achieve even better economic progress. So I'd like to stop here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swanda, for a very insightful answer. My next question is for His Excellency Wandi. Could you please add on to what Mr. Swanda has shared? What are the key drivers of Cambodia's economy at the present time?
Thank you very much for the question, and I also thank you, Yasuyuki-san, for the very comprehensive coverage of the book, but also to give us the perspective on Cambodia. And I think he has touched upon many important issues, which I also will add on. But I want to start maybe just a couple of points to emphasize their importance. I think Mr. Yasuyuki have already mentioned peace, and I would add political stability, which has been, the cornerstone of Cambodian modern histories and development. Many of you know that over the past 500 years of our countries, there wasn't really much of that kind of continuities and stabilities because of internal rift, because of political instability, etc. So we really never grew at this kind of rate that you have observed over the last 2 decades. So that, from 1998 onward, that has been really the most, probably the most significant and important factor to contribute to our growth and development and poverty reduction. I would also add that liberalizations and investment regimes and the free market that we have embraced from the outset, even before the country united, even in the early 80s, even the political regime was different, but actually the mentalities of the leaderships toward free markets was already started from then. So I think that has really paved the way for more FDI coming into Cambodia and the openness of the economies that Yasuki-san have already touched upon. The other third element that I would want to emphasize here, of course, regional cooperations and how Cambodia managed to integrate itself into and benefit from globalization and to integrate itself into the regional initiative have been really important to our country and to reposition ourselves. We are new in ASEAN, and we are new also to WTOs and other mechanisms. But the fact that we have been very, committed, and we play an active role in all of these institutions, the UNs and whatnots, have also helped Cambodia, a lot in our open market access in many of the things, including receiving a lot of development assistance through the ways that we have worked. But I would like to also hear that perhaps not many countries would realize this, but Cambodia have been also demonstrating itself very well that, and while we have benefited a lot from the development assistance that have been helping Cambodia in the early 90s, we have been telling ourselves, and we have been telling our partners that our own leaderships and ownerships of the development process is the most important. So you can see that in the early 90s, ODA was representing more than 70% of our budgets and then our financings, public financings. But now the ratio reverse. Is now become even less than 25% or so. So this you really have to take it upon yourself. I mean, help is there, but unless you really own the process and unless you determine yourself, including better fiscal management, prudent debt management, and all the decision, especially important decisions related to policy, related to your own regulatory regime, then you probably won't be able to really achieve that kind of growth, that kind of prosperity. So I would, and then of course I totally agree with all the nice driver that Yasuyuki-san have mentioned. I think They may vary according to the context of each nations and each economies, but they are all relevant and they're all important. Thank you. And okay, so now go to your questions about what are the current drivers of the economies. Of course, I think the traditional sector for Cambodia, Cambodia still heavily relied on government, tourism. Of course, agriculture still have a significant shares of economies, but its growth has been modest for a long time. But something interesting during this pandemic, and that has been also happening in sort of a more positive way for Cambodia, and including what has been changed in the regional and global supply chains have helped Cambodia to some degree diversify. And if you look at the export data, very interesting that even despite the pandemic, the growth of export, especially on non-garment items, have surprisingly increased. So that is a sign of diversification is happening. Agriculture, despite its modest growth, also very interestingly surged during this pandemic. So there present a lot of opportunity for Cambodia to go agro-industry, to go manufacturing, as Yuki-san mentioned. And we still believe that we cannot really leapfrog entirely into services sector as yet. And many of the developed economies and especially those who still perform well during this pandemic still rely on manufacturing as the backbone of the growth. So we do see the big role, and I think we are doing our best to diversify. And now I think there's a lot of good news to come if Cambodia can really maintain our current management of the pandemics and to take it under full control. So we do see the need for much more intensive investments and upgrade in our human capital. I fully agree with that, and the government is fully recognizing that cornerstone. And we hope that with this trend, as we continue, we hope that we will be able to really play even a more important roles in the bigger shares in the new, trades regimes that we have benefited, RCEPs and the bilateral FTA that we have entered into between, now China, Korea, and soon others. So this really bring a good sort of environment, growth environment for Cambodia. And I think perhaps maybe my last point, which of course is relevant to Cambodia, but also the region, is how this region position in the world context. You couldn't imagine a different situation if you were to be in a different part of the world. But the fact that we are in Asia, the fact that we're in the middle of the growth gravity and the drivers of prosperities, we really have a lot of opportunity to really accelerate our growth. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. That's really comprehensive and very insightful. My next question is to Mr. Watana. Based on the research your team at CDRI has done, what would you say are some other key drivers for Cambodia's rapid growth and poverty reduction? Anything else that you would like to add on top of what Mr. Sawada and His Excellency has already shared? Please.
Okay, thank you. Hope you can hear me well. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can. We can hear you well.
First of all, very good morning to Excellency Wandi and Yasu-san, ladies and gentlemen, who is joining this book lounge today. It's my pleasure to be here. On the questions, first, one of the key points that I can probably pick up from the book is the coexistence between governments, between states and markets. And I think that discussion has long been debated in development economics. But with the result of this book, it seems that states and market can coexist. So the models for the past 50 years would be state-supported market economy. And I think Cambodia, the Cambodia journey of economic development resemble most of what Yasusan presented, or resemble most of the experience in the past 50 years of the examined economy. In addition to this point, I would like to add on two issues that I think I myself has researched quite extensively. Number one's on openness in trade. I think Cambodia has benefited significantly from that, even though there are challenges and downsides to be mitigated. But on average, that's what economists would like to say. I think we have benefited from that. So openness and trade. And our FDIs, the skills and the know-hows brought by foreign direct investments are necessaries for the growth episode of Cambodia so far. And for me, I think we would need that for long-term growth as well. Secondly, I agree that governance is good governance and strong institutions is necessary, because when we talk about state support market economy, governments will have to be strong. Governance has to be efficient and effective in facilitating that. So specifically when there are market failures and that needs government interventions, but in a more kind of like systematic and effective way in order to help the economy, move toward a better and higher equilibrium levels. And on the poverty side, it's also one of my research area as well. I think Cambodia has done a pretty good job on reducing poverty as well. And as you know, along the declining trends of this poverty in Asia for the past 50 years. And I think two things. Number one is that economic growth is necessary. So ensuring that economy is growing is a necessary factor for poverty reductions. But at the same time, I think there has to be a bit of redistribution as well alongside economic growth. Because I think these trickle-down kind of like theories hasn't really proved that market level alone could deal with that issue. So I think redistributions along our economic growth would be necessary to help reduce poverty. And this also seemed to be models that not only happen in developing Asias, but also in developed country as well. So these are the two factors I think would contribute to poverty reduction, and FDIs and good governance are the two additional drivers that I think contribute to Cambodia economic growth episode so far.
Thank you, Mr. Vatna, for the very detailed addition to this issue of the Cambodia's economy. In the interest of time, because we only have 9 minutes, I'm gonna turn to the question from the audience. Unless we don't have many more questions, then I'll come back to ask the question that I have prepared for you three in relation to COVID-19. So far, we have received one question only in the Q&A box. So for the audience who also want to ask question, please do type your question in the Q&A box or raise your hand and I'll allow you to ask your question verbally. So I'm just going to go ahead and read out the question from Harrison White. I believe this question is for Mr. Sawada because it's for it's addressing ADB. So she's saying that she's hearing a lot about health, education, and infrastructure, but the other main issue that she's not hearing is that ADB is not talking about improving the rule of law. to encourage more quality FDI inflow and overall investment and development in Cambodia. So her question is, how can Cambodia go about improving both real trust and also international perception of its judicial system? So Mr. Sawada, if you could address this question, please.
Hello, can I respond?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, this is a very important issue, rule of law, how to improve, and the broader governance. As I briefly touch upon, role of institution, even that respect Asia, high-performing Asian economies has been getting, relatively speaking, better governance, performance. So I think strengthening governance, including rule of law and administrative capacity and service delivery efficiency, etc., etc. These are very, very important area. And indeed, ADB set strategy 2030, next 10-year corporate-wide strategy a couple of years ago. And one of the 7 priority is governance. And the governance can include supporting a better ecosystem of legal and regulatory framework. And for example, ADB has been supporting biometric-based national ID project. And this kind of a project is really foundation to improve government and governance efficiency. The other thing I wanted to respond from the broader perspective is, as I briefly touch upon, role of industrial policy can be good or bad, depending on how it can be designed and implemented. And because supporting markets mechanism is really critical for the public sectors, setting very focused and targeted industrial policy and performance-based and involving some type of competition to improve outcome of policy, and then policy should come with a clear sunset plan and clear rules and regulation. So I think setting these policies, I think ADB has been will play a very important role to support by not only providing a financing, but also financing a grant, but also providing policy advice based on knowledge products, rigorous knowledge product, as I shared briefly today. So I think ADB sets again governance as one of the top priorities. And also from a multiple angle, ADB can support Cambodian governments in improving these areas.
Thank you, Mr. Swada. Because it is about the judicial system, I think it's also related to the government. So I would also like to hear from His Excellency Wandi if you have anything else to add in relation to that. Please, Mr.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. And I think that I would like to perhaps, if times allow, address both the governance issues and also the rule of law. On the governance part, yes, I think we cannot disagree with the importance of governance and the rule of law for the development of the countries, and that has been also in all rectangular strategies of the government have been at the centers of our development strategy as well. But one should not forget, the context where the country came from. I think it's quite important. So we came from the very weak institutions. We came from barely, not really even had any institutions to start with. So that is really something that we should take into considerations. And as you know, even today, we still do keep doing by learning. So we still keep learning and still keep doing, and that has been the one of sort of the success factors, and we are doing our best to really reform, and reform has started in many fields, judiciaries, public administrations, but probably one of the most sort of effective and sort of game-changing reform that probably you have seen is the public financial management that has really taken the country off to a new levels and to a new growth path, and that contributed to many other reforms that the government have embraced. So the judicial system has also been suffering with a lot of issues. So the different system, of course, and but recently you have seen that the government have taken bold steps, including having the new justice ministers and to really put in place a lot of reform mechanisms, including how to address the backlog of cases that is piling up at the courts, including a lot of detainees and prisoners are trying to reduce that number. So there are a whole host of menus, but there are efforts that we have been doing, including also trying to decentralize some of the the court, including creations of more appellate court at the regional levels, and trying to address the case, and also to publish a court verdict, etc. So I won't have time to name every aspect of the reform that has been undertaken, but there is theirs. You also asked about the perceptions, about trust, the real trust and the perception. This is really hard thing, no matter how much you are trying to do at the country levels, but there is a global campaign in trying to discredit and trying to not acknowledging what has been done in the countries, and there is really hard. I mean, so on the one hand, you try to promote the country, you try to do all the things that the country needs to do, but at the same time, there is a very active propagandas against the country. So that is also to be taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. The next question is also for you, His Excellency. It's, by the way, Harrison was somewhere, and my apologies for addressing you as a she. The next question is from Edmund from ADB. The question is, what will be key winning strategy in accelerating human development in Cambodia? It's for you again, His Excellency.
Yeah, thank you, Edmund, my friend, and thank you for the question. The human capital issues has been really struggling for Cambodia, of course, from where we started and where the development have taken us. A lot of people have chosen, factory jobs, chosen employment, and to prefer to drop out in favors of employments and income generation to improve their livelihoods. So that is, and plus the labor mobilities and the freedoms for mobilities that have not been boded well for the human development indicators. So we have put in place, strategies. I want to address a bit about education. Yes, in the beginning of our development, a lot of focus was on universal education and education for all, etc. But once you really look at the socio-economic landscape, you will realize that probably is not really the best strategy as yet. So with the resource limitations and with continued dropouts, you can't really stop people from dropping out. You can't prevent people from moving to Korea, Malaysia, and others to really generate their livelihood. But so the strategy is to really prioritize and focus on higher educations and to try to bring more skills and development. So upskilling and reskilling of people and the current labor force is going to be important. We do have a pool of existing labor force. They're lower educated. So you have to deal with that. But we also have a new entrant into the markets, which we also have to address. So we are addressing multiple fronts, and we have also established a number of initiatives aiming to attract co-investment from employers, including skill development funds and other funds, trying to have promote and try to convince people that yes, you should be investing in your own education, and yes, you should be investing in earning your degree so that your pace will be higher, your employment may be better, and it could also be more secure. And never forget how the industrial revolution and the digital transformation is going to change all of this. You know, it's not the traditional education, it's not the traditional skill that we're talking anymore. And we have been now working with the ADB to design a new projects called skill development, future skill development. I think that is going to be very fascinating, and we hope that we will be able to change the current human development context. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. We are 2 minutes over time, but we have one more question from the audience. So I'd like to just finish this question, if that's okay. I think this question would apply to Mr. Watana. I think if you have done the research related to COVID-19, the question is about the impact of COVID-19 on poverty rate in Cambodia. Has your team done anything related to that, Mr. Watana?
Thank you for the question. In fact, the research is ongoing. We haven't have enough or sufficient data to do the analysis yet. But our hypothesis is that COVID-19 might contribute to increase poverty rate. But that's still our hypothesis, and the research is ongoing. I hope to share with you soon when we finish the fieldwork.
Okay, Mr. Watana, thank you. His Excellency, do you have data on that, whether COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19 on poverty rate? Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I don't have the data, but and we have not had a model to quantify the new poverty rates. But as you can already observe from the cash handout intervention from the governments, there's a lot that more people have enrolled and have requested for support. So we are reaching out. So that is one way, an indications of how poverty might have increased. But the fact that we have put in place that kind of mechanisms and support and social assistance, we hope to ensure that this will give them the relief, and that their falling off into the poverty would not be permanent. It would just be a temporary, because they're not forced to really sell off their assets, their economic assets, and to really make a living. So this is we hope that this is a temporary reason, although it's bad as it looks. But with our support, with the government support, we hope that this is going to be over very soon, and hope that once economics is back to its pre-COVID-19 growth path, people will be able to rebound and to really generate their living. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. We already 5 minutes over time, so I apologize for Kim Long and In Am. If we will have another session for Q&A, so if you don't have new question, we will address your question then after the presentation by our library officer. Mr. Harrison, Edmund, and Bora, I hope our panelists have answered your question. Thank you. So with that, I will hand the floor back to David to continue our session.
Thanks to our panelists and moderator for such a wonderful discussion. Need I remind you that ADB book on Asia Journey to Prosperity is one of our many other resourceful books that you can find on the ADB-CDRI Depository Library. To tell you more about how to access to those resources, we will be having Mrs. Chon Chowi, Library Officer from CDRI, and Ms. Ayun Sundari, Communication Specialist from ADB, who will be giving a presentation on that.
Hello and welcome to webinar of the launch of the ADB-CDRI Deposit Library. In this session, we are going to talk about some resources and services available for you at the CDRI library. My name is Chobi. I am a library officer. Today, I'm so excited to be here to share about the CDRI library collection, facility, and how to make use of the collection. Yeah, CDRI library established in 1992 to support research work. The CDRI library is renowned for its unique social science collection. The library currently holds over 20,000 titles, which are cataloged in online database. It is also act as a deposit library for the several international organizations as ADB and World Bank. The CDRI publication, national and international journal, magazine, bulletin, and daily newspaper are available in the library. The ADB e-library and several e-journal databases such as JSTOR, Research for Life can be accessed at the CDRI library. You can see the slide. Our library open from Monday to Friday. Office time from 7:30 to 5:30. The next slide, I would like to invite you to show about the Deposit Library program.
Thank you so much, Chappy, for the opportunity. Could you share the slide where I can present briefly on the ADB Depository Library program? First, please allow me to express my appreciation and gratitude to the Cambodia Resident Missions, the country director Sunia Durani Jamal and Soleil Som, and as well as the CDRI for the opportunity today to have the first joint knowledge sharing sessions as part of the launch of ADB and CDRI partnership under the Depository Library program. I would like to briefly also mention about the program and why ADB decided to pursue this opportunity to engage in partnership with library across the region. The program, the ADB Depository Library program, is the first program under ADB in 1994 that was aimed to disseminate ADB publication. At that time, the idea was to disseminate printed publications to ADB library partners. Last year, we decided to revamp the program because the world we live in has changed so much. So we are now move away from the disseminations of ADB printed publications into the disseminations of ADB digital publications. And we are grateful that CDRI has accepted our request to be our first partner in Cambodia to disseminate ADB digital publications. ADB partnership with CDRI is the first partnership that we have in the country in promoting or disseminating ADB publication to a wider audience in Cambodia. In total, at the moment, we have around 14 partners of libraries across the region, involving leading libraries, including those in Central West Asia region, Southeast Asia region, and also the Pacific. The first partner that we have in Southeast Asia is the National University of Singapore, and we hope to continue to expand this program and also deepening our partnership with the library, not just limited to disseminating ADB publications, but also to promote knowledge sharing through a joint knowledge sharing event as we have today. I would like to express my appreciation to the Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Yasuyuki Sawada, for the keynote presentation and also the participation in the event today, and also to His Excellency Fanny Han for the presentations and also for sharing of knowledge in the first joint knowledge event that we have with the CDRI today. We hope that this partnership will continue in the future. This is the first time that we organize event together, but there are more opportunities that we hope we can explore together. So it doesn't have to be from ADB sharing its knowledge product, but we also hope that maybe in the future, CDRI, also the Cambodian government can use this platform of our partnership to disseminate knowledge to a wider audience to the in the Cambodia country. So with that, I would like to hand over again, return this platform to Ms. Chafi Chan for from CDRI. Thank you once again for this opportunity.
Ms. Chowi, please unmute your microphone.
Sorry. Since 2005, ADB has supported the establishment of a TSI Center, Resource Tonle Sap Initiative Learning Resource Center, in order to get the documents such as textbook and magazine on Tonle Sap region. E-document and related to Tonle Sap and Mekong River. Other documents related get Greater Mekong sub-region. I would like to share that the CDRI library has an ADB signed agreement in November 2020 to Depository Library. ADB publication on CDRI library. Until now, we have already cataloged to CDRI library system over 1,000 titles. Next slide. The CDRI library holds a collection of over 20,000 titles of the book, classified and list in the online catalog. So we can search library resource by this link. Next slide. The link that show on the slide, you can access and you can search the book by this link. And the next slide. In the research area, you can search by title, author, subject, keyword, classify number, accession number, and anywhere. If you search by title book, you will show and you can download with this link. For more example, if you want all ADB publication, you can type ADB keyword. So all the ADB publication will shown in the list. The next slide. Previous slide. For the hard copy, you can find the device decimal classified DDC, and then you can find the location for the book quickly. The next slide. You can see the CDRI library contact information. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any question. And at the end, I would like to say thank you, ADB, for choosing CDRI library a partner, and CDRI is looking forward to working closely with ADB in order to expand the resource in our digital library, and also looking to collaborate with other organizations. Thank you for attention.
Thanks, Mrs. Chobi and Ms. Ayun, for your very detailed instruction. For the next session, we will be tackling question from our audience. It could be anything related to the book or the depository library. Regard to any question, please type them into the Q&A or raise your hand. Ms. Ryan will be our moderator for this session.
Thank you, Davi. Hi again. So since we have question left from the panel discussion, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start with that. With Kim Long's question, he has two questions to His Excellency Wandi and Mr. Sabada. The first question is related to the private sector. He's saying that because private sector in Cambodia is expanding at a slow pace and is concentrated in a few key sectors that are prone to external shock, could you suggest some strategies for promoting private sector development, taking into account the low-skilled labor surplus and the semi-skilled and high-skilled labor shortage and the low adaptation of technological adoption in labor-intensive sector? So His Excellency Wandi, if you want to start with that. So strategy for promoting private sector development, that's the main question.
Thank you very much. I think this has been a question of the years or the decades, if I may, that we even have been asking ourselves and have been the focus of our strategy as well. So from the context that we came from, of course, we couldn't correct the past, but we certainly can adjust and focus onto the futures. So we have been able to, attract a numbers of investors, including the Japanese investors and other investors. You would be surprised to see that, if you look at the context and the education and the labor force you wouldn't be able to do that because like company like Mini Bears, it's now a factory that produce solar panels. What were we talking about, with this kind of labor force in place? But actually, the success factors and the factor contributing to that kind of successful in inviting FDI into the country has more to deal with many other factors. So I think going forwards, we have to continue to reform our business environment, and that has been really the focus. We have specific targets, for example, that we will be moving ourselves up in the list of doing business by having action-oriented committee, interministerial committee that would address issues surrounding how you really run your business. I think that is really important. The promise of having a very favorable industrial relations, and you have seen that we have also already reformed our laws, and that will also provide it new sort of impetus for us to really ensure that there is a good system in place. We have also revised our investment law that will also give another boosters to the investor. What needs to happen next, as a strategy, is our really strong call to the private sector to join the government, in investing in training and skill development. So far, the private sector was quite reluctant, to really step in a big way, and they mostly relied on government intervention. But I think that doesn't really work that way. And so our strategy is, yes, we will step in. We are creating, a lot of curriculum changes. We are working with, manufacturers to make sure that demand side and supply side are met. But we do need a contribution from the private sector, which is important. Sometimes it's monetary, it's financial terms, but other times it's also, arrangement. For example, how do you really free up some time of your employees so that they can continue their education? I think we have to really have a mutual understanding on that. And so far, it's been positive development. And I think that the private sector will realize how much they could gain from, the cooperation, and sometimes it's a contribution that they would join with the government. So I would just pick up on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. Mr. Sawada, do you have anything else to add to that in relation to this private sector development?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for asking these two questions. As for the first question, I think the two elements in general critical. First one is capacity building and possibly through technical and vocational training. That's fundamentally important, and the ADB has been supporting in many type of capacity building and TVET programs. And secondly, actually, also very important to see improving matching of human resources and demand. And actually, surprisingly, there is room for make this matching mechanism more effective and efficient. So now we can use a digital platform to make it more efficient. Those who have a particular skills and then skill sets in need in the private sector. So I think secondly, I think improving matching quality is quite important. And secondly, so as Excellency Vandi-san also mentioned, external demand is very important for upgrading export-driven development of COVID-19 recovery. And indeed, we see actually not only governments, but also in Cambodia, footwear and travel goods sector. And I think bicycle exports seems to be really strong in Cambodia. These are unexpected or somewhat exogenously driven demand. How to meet this demand and strengthen domestic production? I think that's a very important in your responding to your question. And also, in order to be agile, private sector should have somewhat the freedom, and also government should support this swift response by private sector in meeting external demand. I think that kind of policy and private sector complementarity is critical. So I think that's the my response to the second question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Swada. Mr. Watana, since it's also one of your research interests in private sector development, do you have anything else to add?
Well, thank you for the question. I think I agree with Excellency Wandi and Yasu-san on the some of the factors, but I would like to elaborate on a bit on education and skills. I think human capital is one of the bottleneck binding constraints for homegrown entrepreneurs in Cambodia. So I think investing in education and skill are not only important in the short and medium term, but over the longer term as well. So that binding constraint, I believe, is constraining the ability of homegrown entrepreneurs in our country as well. And secondly, I agree with Excellency Wandi on public-private partnership. I think when we talk about upgrading skills, I think we would need that modalities to work. Sometimes it's not whether there is an availability of public funding to help on certain issue, but more on private sector participation in that program. So I think this strong public-private partnership is needed in order to move this agenda forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watana. To Kim Long, because we have a question from other audience as well, so I would like to skip your second question for now, but if we have time, we'll come back to that, if that's okay. The next question that I'd like to address is the question from INM. So the question is for Mr. Sawada. in M is saying that there's still development gap among among the nation countries in Asia, even there's much improved in terms of economic development. Therefore, his question is whether ADB has any special focus policy to encourage reducing further development gap in Asia, especially for ASEAN member nation countries. Mr. Swada, please go ahead.
Yes, actually, ADB has many projects in ASEAN with the ASEAN members in order to fill the gap, at least partially fill the gap between these ASEAN countries and more developed countries. And maybe I can recap one of the example or flagship project is a GMS program. And the gap can be attributed to multiple elements. One is the lack of a proper physical infrastructure, as I stated in my presentation, and also lack of necessary investment in human capital, and also a broader ecosystem to stimulate the private investment within the country and also from overseas. So GMS program is the one of the flagship programs of ADB to meet these multifaceted challenges to narrowing down the gap, ranging from supporting a physical infrastructure and building up economic corridors, and also facilitating market integration, and also supporting a human capital mobility to maximize the impact of human capital accumulation, and then broader building up social capital among the member countries. Further, not only single country getting richer, but also a group of neighbors country generating positive spillovers and synergies to meet the this narrowing down gap target. So I think ADB has been doing a lot of different projects, and also will continue to do so. So this is my response.
Thank you, Mr. Swada. We have 1 minute, so I guess we can try to answer the second question by Mr. Kim Long. It's about trade openness. His question is, what are some of the country's competitive advantages, and how can Cambodia maintain and even strengthen and expand them in response to the rapidly changing regional and global supply chains? His Excellency Wandi, may you respond to that? It's about trade openness.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think we have mentioned a lot, but I think we should mention it again that our competitiveness will still be, we have a young demographic dividends. Of course, they are low skill, but we can upskill and reskill them. We have an investment and liberal trade regimes. I think that is very important. We have been able to really maintain quite a good industrial relations, labor relation. That is also another positive side. The country has been investing and continue to invest heavily on critical infrastructure that will boost our competitiveness, be it electricity, be it connectivity, logistics, and others. So I think that is going to bring a different and more competitive pictures. The country is embracing digital economies and digital society. That is really big also on our agendas. That is also another factor that we believe that will help us, thrive and to really grow in this competitive environment. So a lot of things have to also happen in the structural reform that we talk about. The rules of laws and the governance remain critical, and we will hopefully we will be able to really sustain, God forbid the pandemic is over, and then we don't have to really have to invest more resources in tackling the pandemic. Therefore, we can remobilize our resources to focus on the much needed investment. So I think that would be important, and hopefully and most importantly that peace and stability in the region, of course, and also in Cambodia, will help us thrive through. And there are indeed a lot of opportunity as we see it. The regional supply chain have shifted. More factories are relocating, and that has been really the opportunity that Cambodia must embrace. Thank you.
Thank you, His Excellency. Mr. Watana and Mr. Swada, do you have anything else to add in relation to comparative advantages of trade openness?
Well, I would add one on ease of doing business. I think that's I think the government is in principle committed in making process and procedures conducive for people, for investor to come here and invest. And I would probably recommend that we continue to make sure that investor find it's easy and conducive to invest in Cambodia. So the government has done a number of programs, but I think it would be good and increase our competitive advantage if we continue to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Watana. Mr. Swada, anything else?
Yes, I think this comparative advantage and dynamic sense moving up the ladder of a different sector, I think that's a very important point. As I briefly mentioned, responding to external demand swiftly and in the right manner, that's very important. And I may touch upon the case of Bangladesh. As you know, Bangladesh emerged as one of the biggest garment products exporter. That was initially driven by a Korean investment. They will train the trainees from Bangladesh, but they will fail to keep them. But rather, these trained people spin out from Daewoo soon after, and then establish their own garment factories and companies. Now we see garment sector is a really leading sector of Bangladesh, and also globally, again, one of the largest. And then Bangladesh actually didn't stop at that phase. And another similar kind of emerging sector in pharmaceutical industry we can observe. And so the critical element is private business response and incentive to build up a new and get into the new area. That's number one. Number two is existence of right human capital to do so. So these two critical elements really leading to a continuous upgrading of industry and sectors. And then government play a key role to a little bit nudge these directions already emerged in the private sector, and also facilitate this direction by providing basic infrastructure, tax incentive, etc., etc. So I think this is very critical and generalizable to the case of other countries, including Cambodia. So again, government play a critical role, but only government intervention is not sufficient. I think private sector's right incentives, the right response, and existing human resources and investment resources, I think that's a very critical. So thank you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Swada. So looks like we have answered all the questions. There were two more questions about the library and whether the video or the audio of this webinar can be shared. So ADB team has already responded to that. So I'd like to conclude this Q&A question. Thank you, three panelists. Thanks so much for your insightful, thoughtful, and very comprehensive answers. With that, I would like to hand over back to Dabi to conclude our webinar.
Thank Mr. Ryan for hosting such an interactive session with our audience and our panelists. For our final session, I would like to invite Ms. Suniya Durrani Jamal, Country Director of ADB Cambodia Resident Mission, to deliver the closing remark of our launch.
Thank you very much. Just give me a second. Excellencies, ADB colleagues, CDRI colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. We've had a very engaging and productive discussion today to mark the launch of the ADB-CDRI Depository Library and the publication Asia's Journey to Prosperity. Thank you for joining the launch and asking some great questions. I have thoroughly enjoyed this panel discussion, and my thanks to the panelists for their helpful responses. As we saw today during the presentation today, education, knowledge, and innovation have been integral to Asia's transformation since the 1960s and will continue to be crucial for the next phase of development. Until recently, access to information was limited to the lucky few who had access to newspapers, books, and libraries, were such a precious resource. Today, with a smartphone and affordable services, the world's information is only a few clicks away. But while we are now living in the information age, we've also seen the growing perils of misinformation. Therefore, trusted sources of knowledge and insight have never been more important. At ADB, we are committed to providing the knowledge and financial resources that our developing member countries will need to achieve their development goals. To support this, we are committed to making our research and publications freely available to all stakeholders in our developing member countries. Free publications from ADB was something that I personally greatly valued as a graduate student. And as a country director for ADB, I'm also encouraging all our staff to spend at least 20% of their time on reflection on what they've learned from their work and in terms of knowledge generation. So I think knowledge generation is very much an integral part of even our own institution. Ladies and gentlemen, ADB emphasizes knowledge because it is crucial for lasting growth and prosperity. We believe that institutions such as CDRI have a very important role to play as independent sources of knowledge and policy advice based on evidence. Institutions such as these also play a key role in facilitating access to knowledge, and I'm very pleased that we have developed this new partnership to strengthen the institute. Including my remarks, please allow me to extend my profound thanks to the Secretary of State, His Excellency Hem Vandi, and senior representatives from the Ministry of Economy and Finance for your participation and insights, as well as really asking and answering the questions very, very effectively. I would also like to thank the CDRI management and team for the excellent moderation of this event. My special thanks to my colleague and ADB's Chief Economist, Yasuyuki Sawada, my colleagues Bernard Woods, David, Soleil, Ayun, and other ADB colleagues who I may have inadvertently missed for their contributions to today's events. Last but not least, I would like to extend my appreciation to all participants for your time and for being here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Suniya Durrani Jamal, for your very meaningful remark. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our morning. On behalf of Asian Development Bank and Cambodia Development Research Institute, I would like to thank all of you for making your time in your busy schedule to join us this morning. It has been our pleasure to host this launch, and I wish you all a pleasant day. Thank you.